Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the Simple Handicap Podcast. This is the NFL Week 5 recap episode with the NFL Week 6 opening odds reaction to come. Later on as the episode, we'll go through each game we saw on Sunday, try to make sense of what we just watched, what matters, what doesn't, what to take forward. Then a live reaction to all of the opening odds for Week 6, where I give my first impressions of what we're looking at for every point spread and total coming up in the week ahead. If you're listening on Monday morning on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube, very good morning to you. If you're here with me on Sunday evening in the live chat, hope your Sunday went well. It was a clean and easy Sunday at Right Angle Sports. 1-0, one play, one release, one bet. It was the Miami Dolphins. We have the Kansas City Chiefs pending for tomorrow, but the current service record for the NFL jumps to 30, 21, and 2, 58.8% on the season. If you are interested in following along with all of the future service releases for the remainder of the season, you can head over to raspicks.com/NFL. All of the details there. Has been a good couple of weeks, and hopefully we keep things going, and hopefully the Chiefs come through tomorrow and get us to a 2-0 week for week number 5. Lots to talk about. Lots of folks already coming into the chat as well. Danny says he cannot wait for this recap. I'm looking forward to it too. Some fun games, some fun results, some interesting takeaways as well, some notes and nuggets, or some questionable injuries that come up as well too. Ryan Roberts still sweating the LA Rams over 46. It's currently 24-19. I'm looking at 1:33 left. I didn't want to keep everybody waiting, so I jumped on with that game going. Let me know in the chat, guys, how the game finishes up, just in case I take my eyes off of it. Darius says, my man Adam, back again. How about those Washington Commanders? Better get those NFC East tickets in before it's too late. Another dominant game from Washington, which we will certainly talk about. CO says, top 2 down in Survivor over at Circa. What is that pool at now? I'm curious how many go down now this week, and what are we looking at for guys remaining? Are you still remaining? Let me know in the chat. Would love to know how you're looking at it. CMR586 says, what a mess of a day. Curious what you had or who you're looking at for this. CMR, let me know what you were looking at, what it made it such a mess. Good to see Gerard Morris back, but he's sick with the Seahawks performance. I know what that's like to be a fan, as the Jets fans, including myself. Very rough start to the Sunday morning with the early kick, and that's exactly where we will start. So I share in your pain, Gerard. The Minnesota Vikings win 23-17. So big takeaway for me in this game is the Jets' offensive identity is all over the place. Aaron Rodgers attempted 54 passes in that game. Hall and Allen out of the backfield combined for 36 yards on 14 carries. I mean, the Jets are so far and away from the offense that they wanted to be coming into the season that this starts to get pretty concerning. Aaron Rodgers has nearly attempted 100 passes in the last 2 games. This cannot be the identity of the New York Jets if they expect to win football games. It was the worst game of the season for Aaron Rodgers. He threw 3 interceptions. 2 of them were very bad. 1 of them went for a pick 6, which turned out to be the differential in the game. The Jets are just not made to be a pass-first team. And it's concerning because they rebuilt the offensive line in the offseason and had so much commentary about how much they wanted to run the football and how they wanted to keep the ball on the ground. That's just not what we're seeing from this team. I don't remember an offense like the Jets with their running back in Breece Hall that just continuously week after week gets blown up 4 or 5 yards in the backfield before he even gets the handoff. I mean, it's so broken up front for the Jets run game right now, and they desperately need to fix that. The Vikings get out to a 17-0 lead late in the second quarter. They had the pick 6 to build into that lead. And if it wasn't for a big punt return late second quarter from Gibson, the Jets probably don't score before the end of half, where they cut it to 17-7 and they go in with a pretty big deficit. Thought the Jets defense played relatively well. There were some really soft calls that went against them when they were defending Justin Jefferson, some PIs, some defensive holdings. But that whole performance was kind of aided by the fact that Aaron Jones went down in the second quarter. This Vikings offense was really disjointed once he went down. And so Minnesota goes into a bye. It's definitely an injury to watch looking forward. When you look at the game as it ended, the Jets end up throwing an interception on the final drive of the game where they're inside the Vikings 30 with the chance to score and kick the extra point to potentially lead and win with very little time on the clock. They don't do it, but box score, very tight. Both teams 3.8 yards per play. Total yardage for each was nearly identical. It was just a matter of Jets mistakes and Jets critical errors that were the undoing for New York in this game. I didn't think Minnesota looked nearly as good as they have in weeks past. I could say it was the worst game we've seen from Sam Darnold, but it was really a Vikings team that was just at the end of it better coached than what we saw from the New York Jets. And that was really the biggest difference in a very equally distributed box score when you look at it at the end of it. And so an ugly one for the Jets, an ugly one for the Rodgers, and they desperately need to figure out what in the world is going on for that offense going forward. Comment saying the run game wasn't working for the Jets. It hasn't all year. This is just another bad game of another bad run performance, and they have to get that sorted as priority number one. You can put Devontae Adams 1A with or without Adams. If they don't have any ground game going, that offense is going to struggle because there's so much reliance on Rodgers, and what we get from him week to week is comes with a lot of variance, especially if you're throwing the football 54 times in a game that is this tight. Now, he does have an official lower ankle sprain that he is dealing with. That's probably going to impact his practice this week. He did finish the game, but an injury that certainly everybody has to monitor. Ryan Roberts says, stopped Green Bay 24-19 final, win and cover for the Green Bay Packers. Chicago Bears 36, Carolina 10. This was never competitive, never close. I guess you could say the Panthers scoring first was enough to make it competitive, but I mean, it lasted for about 3.5 minutes in the first quarter. I look at this game as a rout from wire to wire. The final box score has the Bears outgaining the Panthers by 130 yards, 1.1 per play, 5.6 per pass, and 3.0 per rush. The Bears scored twice in the second quarter, perhaps inflating things a little bit after a fumble and turnover and downs from the Carolina Panthers. Those were two shorter touchdown drives. But other than that, this was dominant. And you can even say when you look at some of the yardage numbers and the output numbers and a score line that is this divisive, that the Panthers probably looked better than they were. Stack up over 100 yards in true garbage time. They bring Bryce Young in, who puts up a few numbers as well. But this was a game that was as lopsided as it looks in the scoreboard at 36-10, and as lopsided, if not more so, as it looks in the box score, which is one of the more extreme that we've seen so far this season. Carolina's injuries continue to mount and stack up. They lose Clowney, who is really the last noteworthy player in the front seven that has not been hurt this season. They're down so many guys up front. They have no answer against the run. And there were so many comments about how the Bears were continuing to run out of more up-tempo looks because the Panthers defense was just gassed because they're playing without starters in the defensive front. It's backups, it's guys rotating, and they just have no answer. Andy Dalton in the pocket was hit 10 times today. The Bears defense continued to win up front. So it was another good game from the Bears on both sides of the football. But you start to kind of put this Bears performance in context. 2 weeks in a row, 2 comfortable wins, 2 comfortable covers. Who's it coming against? You play a Rams defense that's 28th or worst in every major statistical category. You play a Panthers defense that is right at that mark as well, and you could argue a lot worse with the personnel that they are losing and how some of those games, weeks 2 and 3, played out a little bit differently than they were because of the offensive opponent that they faced not needing to be pushed at all. This is a Bears team that now for 2 weeks, the offense has progressed and looked better. Very easy schedule of opponents on the other side. Now, in terms of opposing defenses, it still stays pretty easy for Chicago, which is the interesting thing with this team because it's the Jags in London next week, which has a great defensive front. We'll talk about how bad their secondary is in just a few minutes. But then it's the Commanders, who are 31st or 32nd in a lot of key defensive stats. And then it's the Cardinals, who are right at that level as well. So there's this window for the Bears going into November where the offense is probably going to look pretty comfortable and continue to put up numbers because the opposing strength of schedule is just so soft for what they're facing. And so it's another win and cover for the Bears. And again, they're probably going to look good against some of these defenses coming up in the next couple of weeks. Rudy says Bears will beat bottom half teams. That's honestly kind of what it's been so far. And it's just a very different looking Caleb Williams in the pocket when he has times and things aren't very tough downfield and coverage. It's a very different looking Williams when the run game is going. They lost Jenkins on the offensive line today, and it wasn't that big of an impact because it was just so easy for them to move the ball up front. Different story against the Jags front, but this is what the Bears can look like when they're playing softer competition like this, especially on the defensive side of the football. Baltimore 41, Cincinnati 38. This was a game that was kind of the sharp square game of the week. Lots of pros, lots of shows. Had Cincinnati plus 2.5 as best bets and plays of the week. However, it was labeled. We saw game day money come in on Cincinnati, pull that number down. Baltimore was a very popular side at a lot of sports books and reports that were published. And we see a game that, for the most part, goes back and forth. The Bengals continue to be just a dead over team. The last 4 weeks, totals have been flying over. They've been getting bet up. And then at the end of the week, we're seeing the numbers get bet down. So whether it's people not buying into it or middles trying to be taken advantage of, the Bengals totals have been on the move a lot the last couple weeks. And this was another game that for Cincinnati flew over despite defensive reinforcement showing up on the defensive line for the Bengals. No match for Baltimore as the Ravens ran for 175 yards on 34 carries for 5.1 per touch. The two teams combined for 965 total yards, and each team finished with 6.8 yards per play. So as the scoreline indicates in OT, 41-38, this game was very much split down the middle for the majority. Now, the Bengals had a couple opportunities to win this. If I'm looking at the game and saying who got unlucky or who got the bad breaks in this game that perhaps deserved better, it's definitely Cincinnati more so than it is Baltimore. The Bengals led 24-14 and 38-28 in the second half. The Bengals had a 2nd and 10 on the Baltimore 28 with 3 minutes to play in the fourth quarter. They false started, took him back 5 yards. Next play, Burrow throws a pick, trying to target Chase on a short throw. The Ravens march down the field, kick a field goal to force overtime. Opportunity number 1 for the Bengals to put the game away in the fourth quarter. They couldn't do it. So they have 2 10-point leads, can't hold on. They have the drive in Baltimore territory deep late. They can't convert. Game goes to overtime. Bengals get another break. Lamar Jackson moves the ball across midfield. He misses the snap on a late play clock snap. It bounces off of his hands, goes backwards. The Bengals recover. Cincinnati can't move the ball from that spot. They line up for a McPherson field goal. Snap is bobbled. He pulls it left. Another opportunity squandered for the Bengals to win the game. Next play, Derrick Henry goes 51 yards, sets up Baltimore from the 1-yard line. They don't bother any further. They bring the field goal unit out and kick the winning play. So it's a game where things were very tight, very competitive. It's what we expected from an AFC North battle, but you're looking at who got the worst of it. Certainly have to think in Cincinnati with those 2 10-point leads, the interception late on the final drive on the throw to Chase, and then overtime not being able to capitalize on the fumble. Interesting note to think about this Bengals team and where they're at. 1-4 means 6% of teams make the playoffs. Bengals in pretty dark company for their playoff outlook. However, you look at this offense and how it's trending. It's the 3rd game in a row where Joe Burrow finished with at least plus 0.3 EPA per play, which is 85th percentile or better. He's exceeded that the last 3 weeks, but the Bengals are just 1-2 in those games. And so this is a big defensive letdown for the Cincinnati Bengals so far through 5 weeks because the offense has been awesome and they're getting better every week. They now have multiple weapons involved. Everybody's healthy. It looks great. They just can't get stops on the other side of the ball. And it's becoming a question mark of now with Dax Hill banged up and still missing 1 or 2 guys in the defensive front. Like, is this defense ever going to get to a level this season before it's too late where they're playing to a level that can allow the Bengals to come back and make a run? The schedule is certainly pretty easy in the next coming weeks, but this is a Bengals defense that's a major problem as the offense continues to get better and play better as well. So that was a fun game to watch, but probably a pretty stressful game for a lot of folks as there were some very smart people on the Cincinnati Bengals plus 2.5. Bengals cost me 5-0. Sorry to hear that, H-Train. That's a tough one to watch as you're going through it as well. Crazy Carl says, cheers, Adam. Are you able to make any sense of the Bills' management of the most obvious concussion ever and at the end of the game as well? And so that brings us to the Houston Texans beating the Buffalo Bills 23-20. I appreciate the timing of the question, Carl. That works out very well with this game coming up going forward. First of all, end of game scenario with the throws out of the end zone. A lot of criticism for it online. I don't agree with all of it because the Texans had 3 timeouts. No matter what the Bills did on those plays, run or pass, the Texans were going to call their timeouts as they ran the play. And to set the scene for folks who may have missed it or just tuning in for the full recap because they didn't get it, the Bills were at the, I want to say, 2 or 3 yard line with about 45 seconds left in the fourth quarter, 1st and 10 after a Texans punt. The game was tied 20-20. The Bills attempted 3 consecutive passes and ended up kicking it back to the Bills after not picking up the first down with a little less than 12 seconds to play. The criticism was that the Bills did not attempt a run play, and they threw so quickly that it allowed the Texans to get back in field goal range after the punt and have the opportunity to kick the eventual game-winning field goal. I don't want to criticize the Bills for trying to get the first down. I don't want to criticize them for passing. The Texans were taking the timeouts no matter what happened. What I think maybe deserves some criticism is 2 of the 3 throws were kind of chuck and duck semi-Hail Marys 35-plus yards down the field. Like, they were taking deep shots out of the end zone that had a very low percentage of being completed. I think they could have approached the necessary plays to get a first down in a bit of a different manner. Like, the Bills all season have been this very tight throwing, short, condensed offense, and all of a sudden in that spot they decide to air it out. That's what I have a bit of an issue with. I don't have an issue with how they handled it pass run wise. You have to get the first down no matter what because the Texans are burning timeouts. Now, when it comes to the concussion, that was a violent hit of Josh Allen's head on the turf late in the game, which took him out. He apparently just took a step out of the blue medical tent, had a schnick of smelling salts, and went right back into the game. I don't know who that's on. Like, I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to stand here and say what's right or wrong. I'm going to stand here as someone who watches a lot of football and say, I don't see that anywhere else in the league. And so I don't know how a team gets around that with the spotters that require mandatory concussion testing. In that scenario, it certainly looked like all the signs of somebody potentially having a concussion were there. He just kind of went off the field for a snap, came back in, and was apparently good to go. And so I'm more questioning how that's possible with all the rules around it than I am questioning how they handled it, which was probably the wrong way as well. But it goes back to the concussion protocol that I discuss almost every single day on the podcast. It's like it's a suggestion when it's not timely. When it's timely, everyone just kind of looks the other way. So I don't really know what to make of it. When you look at this game, Houston 23, Buffalo 20, the Texans outgained the Bills 425 to 276 total, 6.3 to 4.7 per play, 8.5 per pass to 4.1. And all of this comes in the score line and the box score 23-20 with Houston finishing -2 in turnovers. The big question for me and the big takeaway that you get away from this beyond the late game scenarios, Josh Allen's concussion, how that was handled. Josh Allen, for the second time this season, stepped up and played another great AFC opponent that's a contender. Did it against the Ravens, did it against the Texans. In this game, he finished 9 of 30 passing for 131 yards and 4.4 yards per pass. It was the lowest completion rate of any quarterback since 2000 who had at least 28 pass attempts in a game. Like, this is shocking stuff from Allen after what we saw weeks 1, 2, and 3 to see how much he struggled the last 2 weeks. And it really comes down to this offense as a whole, which is incredibly restricted with their weapons. I mean, Khalil Shakir was not on the field for this game. His absence was very notable from the first snap to the final whistle. And that is not a guy who's a true number one, but his impact is being felt like a number one option. That was very surprising to me. We still are not seeing a ton of Dalton Kincaid. I don't know what's going on with Curtis Samuel. This idea that everybody eats on the offense is nice when everyone's winning and the Bills are playing with a lead and Buffalo can sit in heavier personnel and run the football and use Josh Allen when needed. But when you're facing deficits and all of a sudden everybody needs to eat, but there's no true number one and there's no real strong offensive identity, that becomes a bit of an issue. And the fact that they were able to come back and make this game competitive and even have a chance to win, I thought was pretty surprising. Is last week they tried to mount the comeback against Baltimore, got around midfield, had the turnover on the trick play shortly after. That shut that down. This game against Houston, they were able to come back. But to me, it was more of what Houston was unable to do after they lose Nico Collins, who went down late in the first quarter. The Texans offense, after Collins went down, had 2 field goal drives. It didn't look like the Texans offense that we saw with him on the field. You want to talk about a true impact of losing a number one wide receiver. We saw it with Houston. And that's a guy to absolutely watch going forward, as it's a hamstring tweak that appears to be on the same hamstring that he tweaked a couple of weeks ago. So a big game between AFC contenders, and one where I think there's more questions about both teams coming out than you get answers on either one. Jacksonville 37, Indianapolis 34, another dead over for a Colts game. The Jaguars outgained the Colts by 2.2 yards per play, 3.8 yards per pass, and 0.5 yards per rush. A clean sweep for the Jags, who get their first victory of the season, much needed. Believe it or not, the Jags are now in the similar spot as the Cincinnati Bengals. The trajectory of how both of these teams got here is very, very contrasting, to put it lightly. But that's kind of putting in perspective where the Jags are and where the Bengals are as we look at AFC contenders preseason, who have now turned into major question marks. I look at this game, and even with the Jags dominating the box score, they still needed the walk-off field goal to win. A Colts fumble late in the second quarter gave the Jags a field goal to take a 13-10 lead into halftime. Third quarter was very quiet, but the Jags score to extend the lead after a big 53-yard punt return and followed it up with back-to-back 70-yard touchdown drives. This game, at the 5-minute remaining mark in the fourth quarter, looked like it was sealed and over. Jags sitting on a comfortable 2-score lead. And from the 5-minute mark in the fourth quarter to the 2:40 mark of the fourth quarter, just over 2 minutes and 20 seconds, the Colts come back and tie the game at 34. Joe Flacco hits Alec Pierce for 2 big plays. Both of them result in big scores. And all of a sudden, the game goes from Jags in complete control with 5 minutes left to Colts tying it up. And it's like, here we go with Joe Flacco bringing another team back from the dead, getting them back into a competitive game. And all of a sudden, the Jags have their backs up against the wall. If Jacksonville loses in that scenario and they blow the lead at home and they go to 0-5, you have to think jobs are seriously on the line after this game going into tomorrow morning. That would have been an absolutely devastating blow. They're able to hang on. Jacksonville drives down the field after getting the ball back. They kick the game-winning field goal. They get out 37-34. Everybody's happy for now. Big takeaway that I have from this game, beyond just how the Colts continue to be a dead-over team, and Jacksonville refuses to accept anything downfield that isn't a deep shot from Trevor Lawrence, is that this Jags defense is 12 Buffalo Bills yards away from allowing 400-plus yards in 4 or 5 games this season. And I referenced the Buffalo Bills game because the Bills got out to a 4-touchdown lead and took their foot off the gas for the final 20 minutes of the game. They finished 12 yards short. The only team not to put up 400-plus yards on this Jags defense was Deshaun Watson and the Cleveland Browns, who haven't eclipsed 300 yards this entire season against any team. Ryan Nielsen refuses to change his defensive scheme. Doesn't matter if they're leading, doesn't matter if they're trailing. And it's like teams have figured this out. It's not a hard defense to move the football on through the air. And these guys in the secondary for Jacksonville continue to get picked on and continue to give up big plays. And so the Jags offense showed signs of life. It was the best game we've seen from Trevor Lawrence this entire season. Defensively, this continues to be an absolute wreck for Jacksonville in spite of everything else. Doug Peterson was spotted a few times on the broadcast, I noticed, with the play sheet. It's not uncommon for a head coach to have a play sheet if he's not the play caller and the OC has one. He refuses to admit it. it sure looked to me like Doug Peterson was calling plays in this game. I mean, the attention he had on the play sheet, where he was on the field, he was chasing things down the field. He was right involved with the play. It sure seems like he had a bigger hand in the offense, and maybe that's a positive going forward. I'm not too sure, but that certainly stood out to me a little bit. Lawrence plus 0.48 EPA per play, 11.4% above expectation, one of the best marks of the week in both. Miami 15, New England 10. Miami makes every mistake possible in a football game and still wins 15-10. It was the one service release. It was the one win today on Sunday, and it makes the record for this Sunday 1-0 for the NFL service. Let's talk about the mistakes. Miami threw an interception. They missed a field goal. They had a punt block, and they botched a snap and hold on a field goal, all in the first half. All of that happened in the first half of the game. It was still a one-score game at halftime. Miami was getting away with making every error possible and staying competitive. They go into the locker rooms at half, come out a completely new team. Miami starts with 56, 57, and 80-yard scoring drives to flip the game from 10-3 to 15-10. New England puts up 100 yards of their total offense on the final two drives of the game. Miami defensively able to tighten up in the red zone, get two stops to keep New England out. Miami ends up outgaining the Pats by 170 yards and 0.6 yards per play, despite trailing for the duration of the game prior to that score late in the fourth quarter. New England made a ton of mistakes on their own. They're not getting off easy for losing this game 15-10 at home. They certainly should have capitalized on some of those Dolphins mistakes in the first half. They didn't. And then they compounded everything with 12 penalties for 105 yards. Starting the fourth quarter, New England had more penalties than they had first downs up to that point in the game. And so it's another sloppy performance for New England. They have so many injuries on offense. They have a quote from Evan Lazar pregame was that they put the offensive line in a blender and were just trying people out at new positions. They had tackles swapping positions. They had guards playing tackles. They had guards swapping sides. You're down to your third string center. You have defensive injuries. They played without both starting safeties. New England is just wrecked with injuries on both sides of the football. And offensively, it's not there for the Pats right now. The only time they've eclipsed 300 yards of offense this entire season was week 2 in overtime against the Seattle Seahawks. And so it's hard to look at either team deserving of this victory, given how many errors, how messy it was. But when you look at just how consistent Miami was moving the football in spite of all the errors, certainly the deserving side to both win and cover in this game, 15-10. Washington 34, Cleveland 13. The landmine was avoided. And the same thing can be said about the Jets, because these Minnesota and Washington numbers coming into this week, as we talked about on the Wednesday preview, very, very high. Both teams end up winning and covering. And part of the benefit of working and betting with a group, and you hear me talk about games not getting over the line, there was a question to start from Lance, and he says, what was it you needed to get there with Chicago? You were definitely onto something. And you hear me go back and forth and say, we didn't get to consensus on this, or we didn't quite get to agreement. When you have all these opinions coming in blind to conference calls and discussions, a lot of the strength that comes from the releases that are put out are based on collective decision-making. And there's experience that comes with that decision-making where a lot of plays end up getting filtered. And what you're left with, hopefully, is the best of a lot of very strong opinions. And that, I think, was really on display this week, because I talked about on Wednesday. I'm like, look, there are so many of these traditional spots like Cleveland should have fit into, but you have these teams with just massive negatives on them that make it really hard to bet into these spots that typically would just be a slam dunk, easy decision bet. And all of the signs pointed to Cleveland fitting into being one of those. And the big negatives were like, we still don't know how good Washington can be with this rookie quarterback. And like, what level of care are you getting from the Cleveland Browns? And we saw both of those on full display. I mean, this was a complete burial from start to finish. The Commanders outgained the Browns by 222 yards, 4.1 yards per pass, and 1.8 yards per rush. Incredibly one-sided box score. This even with that being the case, was still labeled post-game by reporters as the worst game that Jaden Daniels has played so far this season. I think that says something about this offense. He was 14 for 25 for 238 yards with a pick and a touchdown. And the EPA numbers will go and confirm the reporter's sentiment. McDaniels finished with plus 0.15 EPA per play. He was 6.5% below expectations. So from the advanced stats, it was definitely his worst game of the entire season. Both of those marks were worse than what happened in Tampa Bay in week 1, and that was a pretty eye-opening start for Daniels and this Commanders offense. Now, this game, when you take a step back and you look at the play-by-play, Washington scored on 5 of their final 6 drives of the first half. This game was over midway through the second quarter. Cleveland was out of it. The Browns went 0 for 13 on third down conversions. They did not pick up their first third down conversion until the final minute of the game. As mentioned, Cleveland has yet to eclipse 300 yards of total offense in any game. They've yet to eclipse 20 points. Kevin Stefanski postgame says he's not switching from Deshaun Watson. He says he needs to coach better. Good sign of a leader. Perhaps not the wisest decision to go forward. As you're seeing Amari Cooper's body language on the field, a complete wreck. The defense looks checked out. Denzel Ward, the best corner, is now hurt. This is a Commanders defense that ranks near the bottom of the league in every major category, and Cleveland still could not do anything to move the football. I don't know how you continue forward with what the Browns have. It's an offensive line that's dealing with a ton of injuries. There's no identity for the Browns at all. This is a mess in Cleveland. To me, the easiest quick fix to try is to switch quarterback. Doesn't seem like the Browns are content to let that happen, at least not as we sit here on a Sunday evening before Sunday Night Football kicks off. But that is just incredibly ugly again for the Cleveland Browns, who absolutely no-show against a very bad Washington Commanders defense. Commanders offense, on the other hand, continues to look very impressive. Cody Tate says, is there a stat that helps running QBs because Jaden Daniels had an extra 82 rushing yards? Don't know if you can clarify what you mean. Is there a stat that helps? Would love to know for that. When I'm referencing some of these per play numbers, that is incorporating in his scrambling ability, which is always a very efficient play. Ryan Roberts says, when does the offense regress a bit to normal and the poor defense comes to light? Right now, defense is being covered up by offensive fireworks, and it's working. That's really the big question. And I mean, it sucks to get into a scenario where you're betting and trying to kind of catch the falling knife and time exactly that game. It's very impressive what Washington is doing. I don't think anybody believes that it's going to continue at this rate. But at this point right now, the way that the schedule is lining up for them is quite favorable. This week should have been that spot that switched, but this Cleveland team just has so many negatives that really prevented a bet being made on Cleveland in any way. And it's just a matter of when is the right spot and when do things line up to bet against them. This week wasn't it. We'll see if these numbers continue to elevate up and get bet up, because now we're looking at Washington as a whole, as a team. They have to be priced in the upper half of the league when it comes to market ratings, and that's a really unusual spot for them to be sitting in, considering where we were looking at. And we'll talk about what's coming up for Washington in week number 6 in just a second. Denver 34, Las Vegas 18. It's a Broncos win that honestly looks a lot better than the box score indicates. This started off as a game where Bo Nix looked like he was really going to struggle again. Things were very slow. Las Vegas gets out 7-0. Denver comes back with a quick punt. Las Vegas has another big drive that goes 68 yards. They get deep into Denver territory again. They kick a field goal. It's 10-0 Las Vegas going into the second quarter. Denver answers with a long field goal. And again, at this point, Bo Nix is being sacked. The Broncos offense is going nowhere. It's been 3 drives, 1 long field goal to show for it. The Raiders are getting the ball back up 10-3. The Raiders now are driving. They're into Broncos territory again. They're down 1st and goal at the Denver 5. It's the potential to go up 17-3 and make this game look pretty one-sided deep into the second quarter. 1st and 10 at the 1st and goal at the Denver 5. Gardner Minshew drops back to pass. It is intercepted and returned 100 yards by Patrick Surtain, and the game is now 10-10. From that point onward, still, the Broncos offense wasn't coming to life. This game went into the break 13-10. So it was a big swing. It was Raiders 17-3, 5 yards away from it, goes 10-10. The Broncos lead 13-10 at half. And then the Broncos come out, they score 3 touchdowns in the second half, keep the Raiders off of the scoreboard in that time. There's an interception thrown by both quarterbacks as the Raiders make the QB change. Denver's capitalizing on short fields, ends up being a 34-10 lead out of what could have been a 17-3 lead for the Raiders. First and goal at the 5, a massive shift, a massive swing. But looking through the box score, if you take away some of the Raiders' garbage time numbers, it's still an equal output for total yardage. It's still a yards per play that's equal. It's a yard per pass that is within a third of a yard. I mean, it was a very even game for the most part on a play-by-play basis. But just a couple big plays swung the way of the Denver Broncos, and they were able to extend that lead in the second half after it looked really dicey early in the game. Don't know what's happening now with the Raiders QB scenario. Don't know which guy is going to get the start going forward. By all indications, it was a coaching decision. It was not due to injury. So that's something to keep an eye on. Really don't think there's that big of a difference between either guy starting at this point. Everybody wanted O'Connell coming into week 1, but with the Raiders now without Adams, certainly that's going to offset any upgrade you might give to the Raiders just from a pure roster perspective. Arizona 24, San Francisco 23. This is the most surprising result, in my opinion, of the entire week. San Francisco looked dominant in the first half. I mean, they were getting whatever they wanted on offense. They were moving the ball comfortably. Arizona was staying competitive, but it was 23-10 at halftime. There was a blocked field goal returned for a touchdown that aided San Francisco in that. But this is a game at half that I'm watching, and it felt like 23-10 was discrediting how dominant the San Francisco 49ers were in the first half. I mentioned 23-10 at half because the San Francisco 49ers finished the game with 23 points. And I think that that's noteworthy because it's 23 points at halftime. The 49ers did not punt in the second half. So this is a pretty interesting outcome for San Francisco. Their only punt of the game was on the first possession and first drive of the game. They punted with 14 minutes left in the first quarter. They didn't punt again. They had 5 drives that got to the Arizona 13 or deeper, and they have 10 points to show for it on those drives. Some of the issues that plagued the 49ers were because Jake Moody, the kicker, went down with an injury. It did not allow them to attempt field goals in the second half. They tried to convert a 4th and 20 at the Arizona 27 instead of kicking a field goal in the third quarter. There was a fumble by Mason inside the Arizona 5-yard line, which was recovered by Arizona. At that point, it was 23-21. The Niners are going in late in the fourth quarter to make this a 2-score game. They fumble. Arizona goes 75 yards the other way, kicks the field goal to go up by 1. And then it's another interception from Brock Purdy on the final chance of the game for the 49ers to come back and kick a field goal to potentially steal a win. Really bizarre kind of finish for the 49ers, who couldn't kick a field goal, had some big mistakes close to the Arizona goal line, but more so another concerning performance for the San Francisco 49ers defense. San Francisco's 2-3 on the season. In all 3 of their losses, they gained at least 6.1 yards per play or better on offense. And so this defense allows 358 yards to Arizona, 6.3 yards per play. They go allow 50-yard untouched Kyler Murray run for a touchdown in the first quarter. They have no answer for James Conner on the ground. A 49ers defense that I really am having a tough time to peg what they are. Offensively for San Francisco, they're putting up big numbers week after week. This defense, which I thought looked so good early in the season, now to me is looking like a unit that's a lot worse than what we've seen in recent years from the 49ers, and that could be something that plagues them going forward, because there's really no reason that the 49ers should be losing these games where they're putting up 6+ yards per play on offense in 2024. Dave Clark says going for it on 4th and 23 usually is not part of the game plan, especially not from the opponent 27. That was just I don't know. They had no answer for anything close to the goal line, and just clunky mistakes just really did in the 49ers. That was a weird one to watch, because it just seemed like the 49ers were in control all game, and they end up losing 24-23. Cody asks, when you said this has been his worst game of the season, I'm confused how this is worse than the Bucs game. Which advanced stats factor passing and running efficiency? You can look at EPA per play. You can look at success rate. And then I'm also referencing for his passing specifically, completion percentage over expectation is 3 that come to the top of my mind when I'm referencing that stat specifically. So those were the 3 that I looked at and that stood out as well. Green Bay 24, LA Rams 19. So this was the game that finished on air as we started. I don't have a huge takeaway on this game and what we saw. I will say the Packers 5.6 yards per play to 4.9, 7.0 per pass to 4.9. It was a Packers offense that still, I'm watching Jordan Love, and it doesn't feel like he is quite back to 100% yet. I still think there was a performance downgrade in what I saw in the first 2.5 quarters watching him play. There was a big pass that was completed to Jaden Reed down the sideline in nearly triple coverage that was completed that really hold up the 224 yards of passing that Jordan Love had on the day. It was a more run-focused game plan from the Packers, who ran it 30 times to just 26 passes for Love. A pretty surprising discrepancy given what the Packers have been with Jordan Love, but I think it's a reflection of just how bad the Rams are defensively up front, and perhaps some of those limitations that we're still seeing from Love. So it's almost like a progressive curve as we're getting back closer and closer week by week to where the Packers are kind of getting a little bit of a bump each week as Love gets healthier. But I still, you're watching him and it just doesn't feel like he's quite at 100%. Another thing that stood out was the absence of Christian Watson and Dobbs from this offense. And again, it's tough to say, are they wide receiver 1 and 2, 2 and 3, 1 and 3? The Packers have a very evenly distributed passing offense in terms of talent at receiver, but you take both of those guys out and off the field, it makes a difference, because all of a sudden you're relying on Tucker Kraft to step up and take a bigger role. You're relying on Wicks to step into a role that's not quite built for him. And so trying to figure out what's going on with Dobbs going forward and that suspension and what he's dealing with, as well as the Watson injury, which is going to sideline him for a little longer, along with Love getting back to 100%, makes the Packers a bit of a tricky team to handicap and a bit of a tricky team to look at. Matthew Stafford throws the football 45 times. It looked visually, I don't have the numbers, like the Rams are still stuck in between this team that wants to work out of heavier personnel compared to the team that's typically under Sean McVay, this spread offense with 3 wide receivers at a very high rate. I'm having a really tough time trying to figure out what the Rams offense is. Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua still at least one more week away from getting back onto the field. So to me, it's like, how long can the Rams survive? It's a tough word to say when you're 1 and 4, but it's clear that this offense for LA is still very limited without their best weapons as well. Matthew Stafford, far too much reliance on him to contribute in this game, throwing it 45 times, dropped back even more as he was sacked a couple times too. Just felt very unbalanced watching the Rams and that offense. And that defense for LA just remains a huge issue. Even with Williams back, they're still letting guys wide open, so much space against them for teams to take advantage of. That's a big problem for LA going forward. A couple comments. Allison said, heard Circa is under 10 now. Can it really be that low? I don't know. I'm not following the contest stuff, so I'd be curious to know like what it's actually at, because obviously there were a few big ones today that took guys out, including the New York Giants 29, Seattle 20, the final game on the Sunday recap. This was a shocker as well. The New York Giants looked like a team who had the biggest rest advantage you can have without having a bye, and the Seattle Seahawks looked like a team that was on a big rest disadvantage that just played a Monday night game across the country and had to fly back. New York, by all accounts, in this spot was projected to struggle mightily without Malik Neighbors. He was such a massive part of this Giants offense. And everything about the way that this number moved, 6s were taken out, got to 7, game day money on the Seahawks as well. I mean, this was very one-sided by people with a lot of influence pushing this number up in favor of Seattle. And the Seahawks were never competitive in this game. I mean, it was initially looking like the way that the market was bet with the 100-yard fumble return touchdown. Giants could not get the ball in on their first possession from the 1-yard line. It looks like on video that was in fact the Giants touchdown. So if anything, the Seahawks get a bit of a break. So it's an immediate punt for Seattle. It's a 100-yard touchdown return. It's 7-0 Seattle late in the first quarter. And it's kind of like, okay, the market was being bet this way. Like it's looking like this. And then it's a quick punt for Seattle, a touchdown for New York, a quick punt for Seattle, a field goal for New York. All of a sudden you're getting into the break and it's a 10-10 game, but it's a game that felt like the Giants were in control of, because that one play that went 100 yards the other way was that defensive score. You're watching the New York Giants without Malik Nabers early in the game with a 79-yard drive, an 81-yard drive, a 60-yard drive. I mean, they're just walking up and down the field on the strength of this Seahawks team, which is defending things up front, and Mike McDonald at home, and the advantage in how good Seattle looked against Miami, how good they looked against Denver. None of that came through, and the Giants were just walking the ball up and down the field. Seattle in the second half, they come out, they fumble the football inside New York territory. The Giants take that back. It's another 77-yard touchdown drive. The Giants follow that up with a 60-yard field goal. I mean, it's just long drive after long drive after long drive for the Giants. And at the end of the game, with the Seahawks potentially still after all of this, they get the touchdown to pull it to 23-20. They're lining up to kick a field goal late in the fourth quarter with a chance to tie it, potentially force overtime. New York blocks the kick, takes it back for a touchdown the other way. They kneel on the 2-point conversion, 29-20 final, evens out that luck score for Seattle on the defensive 100-yard return earlier in the game. And you're looking at a box score at the end of it where the Giants outgained the Seahawks by nearly 100 yards total, 0.2 yards per play, almost 2 full yards per pass. I mean, that was as impressive as a Giants performance on offense in a surprise spot as you're ever going to see from this team, down their best number one weapon in Malik Nabers and down their running back number 1 in Devin Singletary. Incredibly impressive for the Giants in that spot to get away with the win. A couple comments before we get to week 6 opening odds reactions. GM says, I think 277 left in Circa. That sounds better. Mike says 227. We got 2s, we got 7s. Not very many folks left in Circa, and that's pretty incredible to see how low that game or that contest gets this early in the season. We're not even in week 6 yet, and the vast majority of it have been already taken out of the contest. Mike also says Wong favorites on teasers this year have to be under 25% outright. I actually don't know what the stat is on Wong teasers. Have not been playing a lot of them with how expensive they become. Would actually love to know that. That's something I'm going to go back and look at, I think, a little bit later tonight. Let's get to week 6 opening odds reactions. We've got about 10 minutes before Sunday Night Football kicks off between the Dallas Cowboys and the Pittsburgh Steelers. Week 6 begins just where we left off. San Francisco on the road at the Seattle Seahawks. San Francisco is a 3.5-point favorite on the look ahead. They reopened 3 minus 120. Total from 48 down to 47. Now, this is a tempting game for me to drive across the border, get the rare Thursday night game in that you can watch, as Sundays are completely off limits. Wife and I had some personal stuff to deal with on Friday that took me away from the desk, and I'm still struggling to recover, as you can probably tell in my voice on this one. So there's never a good sign to be away from the desk during football season. I'm feeling the effects, but a Thursday night game is always tempting to try and attend, especially one of this rivalry. I'm looking at the Seattle weather right now. No precipitation, very little wind. Temperature looks clear. Looks like it's going to be a clean night in Seattle. I say that because I think I'm a little bit surprised to see this total from 48 on the look ahead get down to as low as 46.5 currently at FanDuel. The 49ers offense, as we mentioned, moving the ball at will. The Seahawks issues this season have been much more on defense than they have on offense, which is a surprise. I know this is a Thursday night game. It is a Thursday night game that is the first for a new coaching staff, and this is a much different new coaching staff as it is a true first-time head coach, offensive coordinator that are going to have to putting together a game plan on this short rest for the first time ever for Seattle playing in the Thursday game. So that comes into factor. Divisional games trending under with the exception of last Thursday. It is a bigger number at my initial reaction at 48 on the look ahead. I get these games when you get to that nearly 50 mark, you're just seeing under money come in like crazy. But if these 49er defensive issues are real, and we saw something from Seattle today that is concerning, probably looking at, I guess initially a bit surprised that it's maybe come down a tick. I can't disagree with anything that I'm seeing on the point spread here. No real thought as I'm looking at that. Both teams underperform, and we see just a minor adjustment in favor of the Seattle Seahawks in this one, as I guess the 49ers were viewed as a bigger underperform than what we saw from Seattle. Sunday games, London, again, another game at Hotspur Stadium. Jacksonville was a pick'em. This game was a pick'em on the look ahead line. We're now out to Chicago, -2, -115, total from 42 up to 43. Bears really starting to get the credit that they're deserving in some of these games. You're looking at this one now on a neutral. The Bears a 2-point favorite. We saw the Bears at home closing -3 against the Rams. We saw the Bears at home closing -4 against the Carolina Panthers, both wins and covers. You're taking away home field advantage. Looking at the Bears now laying this number against the Jags team, which is getting very close to effectively pricing the Jags in that Rams-Panthers territory. I don't know what's real and what's not from the Jags' performance against the Colts in terms of the offensive play calling. Was there a switch? Was there a change that we're going to see moving forward? Hard to say. The Bears defense is certainly a tougher task than the Colts defense, but if the Jags defensive front can be competitive against this Bears offensive line, especially if Jenkins is hurt, we're going to see the Bears offense look a little bit different than it has the last 2 weeks, and then we'll probably see the Bears offense rebound the next 2 weeks after this. I don't know if it's fully deserving of the bump here for Chicago, is perhaps my initial thought in this one. Washington on the road at the Baltimore Ravens. Here we go. Ravens, a 7-point favorite on the look ahead, down to -6, -115. The total from 49.5 is already as high as 52. Baltimore putting up big numbers on offense. Washington's defense is not going to have an answer for Baltimore offensively. I think the big question is, what version of the Ravens do you get? Two very competitive games against top AFC opponents in the last 2 weeks. Just go to OT. They go to OT against the Cincinnati Bengals. They win 41-38. It's a very competitive game, big in the division. Now they go back home out of conference against Washington, whereas the Commanders are coming into this game absolutely coasting. Tough to say what version of the Baltimore Ravens you're going to get. If this is a full 4-quarter effort and they're not taking the foot off the gas, I mean, the Ravens offense against the Commanders defense is a major mismatch. And I would fully expect this to be, if there is a spot where we see the Commanders really take a step back, come back down to earth against this Ravens defense. I mean, you talk about a team that knows how to defend a mobile quarterback because they see it every single day in practice. It's the Baltimore Ravens. You talk about a Ravens defense that can really confuse a young quarterback with a lot of simulated pressures up front. Ravens defense is going to be able to do that. This seems like it's a very bad matchup for the Washington Commanders. I think the big question mark and potential negative here is what version of the Ravens are you going to get coming out of these last 2 weeks? Arizona on the road at the Green Bay Packers. Green Bay 5.5-point favorites on the look ahead, down as low as 5, currently at Chris, total from 49.5 up to 50. I get why it's come down. Again, you're dealing with the Packers having 2 top wide receivers, likely not on the field. You're dealing with Arizona looking much better than expectation against the 49ers, winning a big game. That's a tough one. No opinion on that one at the moment. That's an interesting number to see that adjusted down for Green Bay at home, with the Cardinals now going away from home, playing outdoors on the road at the Packers. Houston on the road at the New England Patriots. Texans 6-point favorites on the look ahead, out to 7-point favorites on the road in New England. Total from 40.5 down to 38, and definitely trending under. Would probably think there's a little bit more under money coming tonight when you're looking at just how inept the Patriots offense has been. You think about the familiarity between defensive systems like the Jets, like the 49ers, and the Texans, and how those defenses come from the same family and come from the same scheme. New England struggled mightily against the Jets defense. They struggled mightily against the 49ers defense. What's the expectation that things would be different against this Texans team when you're putting up 10 points against a Dolphins defense that's down a ton of starters? I have a hard time seeing how that would be a whole lot different. Now, sidewise, this is pricing in what Houston is pretty appropriately as you're looking at the Texans laying 7. Can't really do a whole lot with that side, I don't think, in my first reaction. Tampa, New Orleans still off of the board. Cleveland on the road at Philadelphia. Eagles 6 on the look ahead. We are out to Eagles -9 at home. Total 43.5 up to 44.5. So the big thing to think about here is A.J. Brown, by all accounts, should be back. Devonta Smith, by all accounts, should be back. So it's early season Eagles offense off of the bye. Time to get things right, perhaps sort things out defensively, getting your 2 biggest contributors on offense back, going against a Browns team in total disarray. We saw the Commanders adjusted up 3.5 points from their look ahead this week against the Browns. We're seeing the Eagles bumped up appropriately. I think you have to bump up the Eagles because of offensive player health. You have to bump it up because of the bye. I think you have to continue to downgrade Cleveland because of how horrid they look. Can you get comfortable laying 9 with the Philadelphia Eagles at home? This is putting them in a completely different price range than they have been at any time this entire season. Is a much bigger number than we have seen them forced to lay, and you're laying this big of a number with a team whose biggest issue all season has been the defense, number 1, number 2, taking care of the football. That's a steep price to lay even against Cleveland having all of these issues. Indianapolis on the road at the Tennessee Titans. Indy, a 1-point favorite, right where it was on the look ahead, total from 41.5 up to 42. I don't know if the Tennessee Titans with Will Levis likely to start in this game is enough to slow down the Indianapolis Colts games getting bet over. I mean, there was weather all week against Jacksonville that held the total relatively in check. That total still closed right where it opened because of the weather. Colts games are just getting bet over every single week. And so this game, barring any more weather, is probably at this low of a price going to see the number get bet up. That would be my initial thought on this game. LA Chargers on the road at the Denver Broncos. 1.5-point favorites were the Chargers on the look ahead. They are now 2-point favorites in this game. The Chargers, coming off of the bye, would expect Justin Herbert to be healthier, would expect the offense with a new coaching staff and a new scheme going through some ups and downs to have a bit of a reset coming into this game. Chargers are taking on a Broncos team that certainly had a lot of things go right for them in that game against the Raiders. Chargers certainly look interesting to me at this number, less than 3. Pittsburgh on the road at Las Vegas. No number yet as the Steelers about to kick off in Sunday Night Football. Atlanta on the road at the Carolina Panthers. Falcons were 3-point favorites on the look ahead. Kirk Cousins puts up 500-plus yards of passing against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Falcons come away with a victory against Tampa on Thursday Night Football, and all of a sudden we are seeing the Falcons from 3 out to a 6-point favorite currently, a 3-point adjustment up against the Carolina Panthers defense. This, again, for Atlanta is now moving the Falcons, similar to the Eagles, into a completely different realm of pricing. I think the post-game comments from Cousins were interesting, where he was saying he felt a lot more comfortable in the offense, felt comfortable to the point where he could let it rip. We heard from Zach Robinson that he was now starting to get very comfortable with the play calling and the situation that Kirk Cousins was in. For Atlanta, even if they go really run heavy in this game, the Carolina Panthers have so many injuries up front that I would expect them to have success on the run if they kind of back out and go into a less optimal game plan. I don't know who's rushing the passer for the Panthers if Clowney is going to miss this game. I mean, they have so many injuries up front. You would think Atlanta is going to be very comfortable in the pocket. This has the feel to me at this price point like one of those classic Cousins games where it's just a bit of a letdown. And I don't know why I'm kind of getting that sense given how lopsided and different both of these teams have looked the last 2 weeks. But as you get to this price, like the argument I had for backing the Bears this week was the Panthers were kind of riding a premium put upon them from the Raiders victory that they had a couple weeks ago. As you were looking at the Panthers closing at effectively the same price the Rams were being bet at against the Panthers, there was about a half-point difference at the time I was making the case. We saw that kind of being disagreed with as the week went on. And now it's the spot here where I think that premium, looking at how much this has been adjusted up, even if it is based on the Falcons' performance, is kind of taken out of this, and we're back down to like basement level Panthers pricing. And I wonder if this is now just too big of a number for the Falcons that's maybe been blown up and adjusted up now that the Panthers are back down to earth. Even with the injuries, it's asking a lot from this Falcons team on the road to cover. Detroit, Dallas still off of the board with the Cowboys playing shortly. Cincinnati on the road at the New York Giants. What in the world are we looking at here? Bengals were 5-point favorites on the road and are now 3.5-point favorites on the reopen. Total from 46.5 up to 48. You want to talk about another dead over team? Mark the Cincinnati Bengals down. There has been money disagreeing with them the last couple of weeks as it got to kind of peak pricing. Bengals are just getting blasted on the overs early in the week, and then there's steam coming in later on the week in the unders, which is just crazy because it's a defense that can't stop anybody, and then it's an offense that's, again, it's 3 weeks in a row for Joe Burrow with an 85th percentile performance or better in EPA per play. So it's like the offense has not had any issues in the last couple of weeks. It's all been on the defense, and I don't know what can be fixed because the reinforcements for Cincinnati came back this week. I would expect Malik Neighbors to be back on the field for the Giants in this game. It would be pretty unusual for how – shouldn't say unusual. It would be unexpected for him not to play in this game. I don't know about Devin Singletary. Won't speculate there. For the Cincinnati Bengals, this is not a step up in competition from opposing defense compared to 2 of the 3 last opponents they have faced. And the fact that they were able to look as good against the Baltimore Ravens as they were the previous 2 weeks against low-level defenses, and now they're stepping back down in class. I mean, this is going to be a Joe Burrow versus the Giants secondary game at 1-4, all the urgency in the world. I would say I'm initially a little bit surprised to see this number adjusted down 1.5 points, given how Cincinnati had opportunities to win that game multiple times against Baltimore. Giants win was impressive. Don't get me wrong. How much of that was the spot for Seattle? I certainly thought the teams looked like teams playing in that typical rest advantage that was at the max level for no bye. Jets Pete says that may have been a dream crusher for Cincy that lasts a week or two. Joe Burrow's face on the sideline at the end of the game and as the Ravens were driving down, certainly would agree with that. That's a very, very good point and something to consider. Monday Night Football, it's the Buffalo Bills on the road at the New York Jets. Bills -1.5, bumped up to -2.5 total, 44 down to 42. And so these two teams have seen under money come their way. Bills offense very limited. Jets offense obviously limited as well. We have Aaron Rodgers, who will likely find the injury report. Perhaps Josh Allen hits the injury report. We'll see. We still don't know what's going on with Shakir. Tight division game, AFC East, lot at stake. Like, I get the under sentiment. I certainly can't disagree with why the Bills were bumped up in this spot, just considering the recent performance we've seen from both of these teams, specifically the Jets the last 2 weeks, perhaps more so than the Bills. But then again, it's like the argument for the Bills that you could say they could be bumped up is the competition they faced has been more difficult than what the Jets have faced. But the Jets have kind of now played in 2 rain games against 2 better defenses and looked really limited in what they could do offensively. The Bills have just played juggernauts, but we've seen a very different looking Bills team than what we saw the first 3 weeks when they had to step up. And so it's like, where are you putting the Jets team as a whole in this conversation? Are you putting the Jets closer to like an Arizona that the Bills feasted on in week 1? Are you putting them closer to a Jacksonville that the Bills beat up? Or are you putting the Jets closer to a Ravens Texans category? I don't know. To me, the Jets would be closer to the latter 2 than the former 2. And so we might get a Bills offensive performance that maybe isn't Josh Allen 9 for 30, but it's probably not Josh Allen against the Jags great against this Jets defense, which he's struggled against in recent seasons. Interesting number. I not really an opinion that jumps out to me on that game as I'm looking at it, but that is one that certainly strength of schedule in recent weeks is really going to factor into and play into as well. So as I'm sitting here, we're seeing the Dallas-Pittsburgh game get smashed over, kicking off shortly. We're seeing the Chicago Bears now up to 2.5 at Chris against the Jacksonville Jags. We are seeing the Carolina Panthers take just a touch of money. That's now 6 minus 103 at Chris for Atlanta. So that'll be a number worth keeping an eye on as well. And then the Bills 2.5 minus 115 and minus 122 over at Pinnacle as they flash a little bit on the screen as well, getting bet in that spot too. And then the other one that took money was the Chargers at 2 minus 115. So that was an interesting card. To me, the week 6 card is a lot more bettable than the week 5 card. And that reflects, we had 1 bet, 1 release on the Miami Dolphins that wins. We've got the Chiefs pending tomorrow. We'll see what comes of that on Monday Night Football. And then we'll look forward to a big preview show on Wednesday here on the YouTube channel at 9 a.m. Pacific. If you enjoyed the preview, an initial reaction and recap show here on Sunday evening, the subscribe button's down below. Would appreciate a thumbs up as well if you're able to before you check out and go on and watch Sunday Night Football between the Cowboys and the Steelers. Again, the voice is a little bit under the weather. Had a very busy Thursday and Friday in life, catching up with a couple things going on behind the scenes. So back at it, full strength for the upcoming Week 6 podcasts every single morning. Wednesday live stream preview, 9 a.m. Pacific, and we'll have everything covered for you with all of the Week 6 games. If you're interested in getting any releases, would anticipate we likely have one tomorrow morning, raspicks.com/NFL for all the info. Current service record for the season, 30, 21, and 2, 58.8%. Hopefully have more than just 2 releases coming up in Week 6. Thanks, everybody, for stopping by. We'll chat to you Tuesday morning, and then again on the live stream preview bright and early Wednesday morning here on the YouTube channel.